And so we are now going to talk about Visionarium, which was later duplicated in Florida under the name The Timekeeper. We will also discuss the Orbitron, standing proudly at the heart of Discoveryland. But without further ado, let's jump back in with Tim Delaney.
So, my first question about that project is, how did it all started? What I mean by that, we all know the history with the French government, etc., negotiating and signing the contract for Disneyland Paris. I suppose you've already worked and started working on the concepts for Disneyland Paris before that, because you already had to show the French government something. Am I right?
That is correct. That's correct. What we ended up doing is that when the word was going out that the new management, the Michael Eisner, Frank Wells group, when they wanted to actually start expanding the parks, they definitely wanted to go to Europe. So and they designated Tony Baxter to be the overall creative executive. And so I went to Tony and I said, I'm on. And he's like, great, I need you. Let's go, So because I had been doing a lot of the futuristic stuff, I was kind of more the Tomorrowland kind of guy. But we started talking about doing something different. So what we did do is we did assemble a team, and we started doing some preliminary work. So they were trying to debate whether to go to France or Spain.
Yeah.
So we were on hiatus, as I said, but we did start to do some preliminary work so that everyone could understand what the scope of the work, or how much work was, or how big the attractions, how big the resort was going to be. How involved was it going to be? Was it going to be just a Disneyland park, or was there room for other parks or campgrounds, or it was just general kind of developing the kind of the idea and the scope behind the park. So there was enough there, but we didn't really get into serious design. We were held off and put on hold for a long time. So we eventually got all that behind us, and the contracts were signed. And so everybody started developing their own teams. Each land did. Eddie Sato was on Main Street, like I said, and Tom Morrison, Fantasyland, and Chris Tietz and Jeff Burke doing Frontierland. And I was going to do this Discoveryland. And so they came to me and said, well, because this is a new land, you're probably going to not make opening day. And so, you can just start developing the attractions, but with one exception. And the one exception is in the contract between the Walt Disney Company and the French government. The French government wanted to have an attraction dedicated to France, essentially. And they had suggested a Circle Vision show. Mm-hmm. So I was like, Circle Vision.
Yeah. The Disney company already had a few Circle Visions, including Epcot, of course, and you knew that the concept itself was difficult because there was a limited time span on a Circle Vision show.
Well, right. That's exactly it. Because Circle Vision shows, and when they were unique. I mean, back at Disneyland days, but eventually they became more popular, I should say, with when we did World Showcase for Epcot. But Circle Visions have a lifespan, and it's not very long, okay? And it's a movie. I'm not a big go to theme park movie unless it's some kind of a special movie, special effects. Okay, so anyway, so that was something so in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, we're going to have to do something someday about that. So, but we're going to put all that aside for just a moment. What is this Discoveryland thing?
Yeah.
And so I think in my discussions with Tony Baxter, I think he was really instrumental in this, and he was like, well, maybe we should just focus on great European visionaries, or we have a lot of discussions and we kick around ideas, especially show things. But the big breakthrough for me was that when I analyzed all the other lands in the Disney parks, it could be Fantasyland, could be Adventureland, Frontierland, Adventureland, whatever the existing lands are going to be. I kind of broke them all down and realized that none of them are dedicated to one subject. They're all kind of collections. They're a collection of, Fantasyland is, you have stories from Germany with Pinocchio, and you have Sleeping Beauty and French stories, and, all of these kind of pan-European kind of stories that came together in what they called Fantasyland. Adventureland was a collection of exotic places, North Africa, the Caribbean, just exotic locations and pirate ships and all that. And the Frontierland was really kind of the Old West, but it was also kind of Northwest and the United States and desert and all that. But traditionally, what would happen is when we did Tomorrowland, there was always one vision of Tomorrowland architecture, and it quickly became Yesterdayland once they get open. The only difference happens to be that if I was ever to do another Tomorrowland again, which I won't, but I would love to go back to the original Disneyland 1956 Aero Centerland kind of vision of what, kind of rounded, and, I really loved all that stuff. So I guess maybe I'm showing my age too. But anyway, so I said, well, wait a minute. Well, if we're going to go to this new Tomorrowland, why don't we do a collection of futures? And that way it kind of mitigates the whole issue of you have one future and that's it. So if you said, well, we could have a Jules Verne vision of the future, or we could have an H.G. Wells vision of the future where there's time machine, or if we had a George Lucas vision of the future, or even, God forbid, a Michael Jackson vision of the future.
Well,
okay, no comment.
Not the best vision, but still.
Woo! So, yeah, my meeting with Michael Jackson, someday I'll tell you about that.
So cool.
But anyway, so it was like, okay, well, maybe we could do something here. Maybe this would be great. So then I'm thinking, well, what are the other ones? And so we listed as many as we could that were popular. And you kind of want to list visionaries in Europe, so they're recognizable. And what is the right attraction for the right theme for the right visionary? Okay, so that kind of dictated the story, as well as it dictated the architectural styling. Okay. Now, as a little sidebar to all these things, the one thing that I always loved about the original Tomorrowland at Disneyland was everything about Tomorrowland was a land on the move. Yeah. You had the People Mover, the monorail, Skyway buckets, Autopia, Phantom boats, what else have we got? It was that People Mover. You had the rocket jets, right? So everything was on the move. Well, as Tomorrowlands kept getting bigger and bigger, more powerful attractions like Star Tours and Space Mountain and all that, all the attractions were becoming hidden. So you have all these big giant boxes, but there's nothing going on. Visually you don't see it. And again, you want to stimulate people. So they said, well, why don't you put a rocket jet in there? And I'm like, look at it. If I can't put it on top of, a tower and you're really way up in the sky, then, why should we do that? So anyway, we ended up laying out the land. And then I thought, well, if we want to do something that's kind of a Jules Verne or a Leonardo da Vinci planetary model, why don't we turn that, turn the rocket ships into that? So it's in the middle of the land. So you have all these things going around, because with Visionarium, that's inside, and eventually Space Mountain was going to be inside, and Star Tours is indoors. And so there was no energy in the land. You have to have kinetics. It has to be moving. And we did not have an Autopia at that time, So eventually I designed this whole kind of Orbitron thing with planetary models, and, and that was the basis of that. And it somehow activated everything, kind of spun off and orbited it around that. It was kind of a visual metaphor, if you will. Mm-hmm. So it became a great thing. It became a ride. It became a kinetic sculpture. And it became an icon. All three things in one. It was great. It was fantastic. So that started that. So then we still had this, oh my God, so what are we going to do with this circle vision thing?
And you had to do it because it was an obligation. It was mandatory by the contract.
Well, it was mandatory. and what happened is it was the French who said, well, why don't we just do a circle vision? Because I think they wanted to do a travel log is really what they wanted to do. But, it's like, yeah, well, we can do that. But it wasn't something that was mandatory for Discoveryland. It could have been anywhere in the park. I went to my other producers and they went, we don't want it. You got it. What do we do with these dirty diapers? No, we don't want it. So the fact is, we talked a lot about it. And again, we had team groups and there were, with our film group and all that. And I just said, well, the whole quest, and Tony was involved, and maybe Tom and Eddie, and we kind of talk about all these things, because we kind of share ideas. We have our own ideas with our own teams, but also you kind of collaborate together, Mm-hmm. And so the whole quest became, how do you take a movie and turn it into an attraction? And that was really the key. That's kind of the big breakthrough. It's like, it's a movie. Okay. Yeah. So we really, really wanted to do something with Jules Verne. So the whole point was, how do we actually do that? So we just started developing it. And the whole big breakthrough was like, hey, let's take the H.G. Wells story Time Machine and let's build a time machine inside there. And so we needed an idea behind that. So I developed this robot. It was going to be Robin Williams at the time. Yeah. But his French wasn't that good. But I spent an entire day with him just going through stuff, and along with the theme park productions people like Tom Fitzgerald and Carol Rotundo. And so it was like, let's see what we can do. And so we wrote this story, and it was going to be taking you back in time, and the idea of the 9-camera system. Well, what do we do with that? Well, we're going to send this robot called Nine Eye, so he can capture the world. And so now, again, when you start down the creative path on things, you have no idea how this is going to go. This could be like the dumbest thing in the whole world, or, it could be a good solution.
Yeah, definitely.
And so, I mean, you just don't know. And so, and on top of that, when you do a show like that, there's not a really clever way to visualize, in concept design. There's not a way to visualize. How do you create this? I mean, how do you do it? I mean, what is a circle vision with going through time like? What does that look like? But I mean, it has some possibilities, and you go like, well, that's, it's a possibility, but it's kind of a, when you design an attraction or a ride system like Orbitron, or you design architecture, you can do renderings, in a way that's a bit easier. But when you want to create an experience, it's just tough to do. So eventually,
no, it's okay. It's very interesting because by the creation of the Circle Vision ride, which was for you a kind of a big challenge because it was an outdated technology, it was a little bit lame. So you turn that problem into a solution, and so you. Because you were asked by Tony Baxter to create that ride. In sort of that, we feel in everybody in this room and major fans in France that the Visionarium was like an introduction for Discoveryland after all. Is that correct?
A sort of pre-show, actually. I
would say having it as kind of an introduction to Discoveryland is, and I think that's a really good description of it. I think that's a really good description of what it ended up being. But I think that we all, and on top of that, when it started developing, it became even more interesting in a sense that we realized that we all kind of like the idea of bringing someone from another era into the world we live in. And, we all have that kind of secret fantasy about like, oh, wouldn't you like to do this? And so the idea, the selling point was, let's go back in time. And I can't tell you how many times we would go back and forth. And what do we do? Do we go back to Jules Verne's time? Do we bring him forward? Do we, it was like, it was. I remember going to a meeting with Jeffrey Katzenberg, and Katzenberg's like, I'm getting emails from everybody here, from this writer, that writer. Tim sent something, Tom sent something, Tony sent something. How are we going to get this handled? So, we really dedicated ourselves to like, okay, let's bring him to today and let's see the world that he envisioned. Let's see it through his eyes. And I think that there's kind of a special kind of quality for that, and so we did it. And you have to make stuff up. Now, you make up, how is this going to work? And so you had to get people to buy in that Nine Eye was going to go through time. And so we had that, the Robin Williams character Robin Williams kept telling us that he spoke French, and then we had people listening like, no, he can't carry the show. But anyway, he was actually pretty funny just sitting around talking with him all day. But,
maybe it was too cliche,
And of course. But, you're never going to get a performer like that to admit, like, no, I can't really do it, But then, then the whole thing fell apart with the relationship between Walt Disney Company and Robin Williams because of the Aladdin thing. And that's a whole other story.
Yeah, at the time, yeah.
And it was fine. It didn't work out very well at all. But then, they got Michel Piccoli to play Jules Verne. And I'll tell you, it was pretty great. The first time I saw Michel Piccoli, stuck on the front of a TGV, that train, that opening scene was actually, it's like, okay, now we can get people to understand what this is all about. So, it worked. It worked pretty well. It was good. It was. I thought it was very good. It wasn't the greatest
actually,
but I thought it was very good, and it was really, 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 really working an idea and trying to make this thing work. We would have never come up with something like that on our own, but because it was a requirement and the desire to do something unique, especially for this park in Paris, it was really, really important for us to do that, and I think it worked out really well.
Yeah, and actually, we in France, we had a very sad news this beginning of this week. On Monday, we all learned that sadly Michel Piccoli passed away a few days ago, and we were just talking about that just between us here in the Puissance Park studio with the team, and we also wanted to pay a tribute. He was a monster in cinema, in French cinema, actually, and it was so good. I think everyone here rewatched his part in the Visionarium movie just after the announcement, and it's a great loss. And we just wanted to pay a small tribute to this guy and what he brought to the cinema, and what he brought as the Jules Verne part. Amazing, yeah.
Did you participate in the casting for the actors at the Visionarium ride?
I was not involved in that. I was busy trying to get the park built. So we have our what they call theme park productions, TPP. They're the division at Imagineering, where they basically, once the idea is set and sold, then they go into it's a whole other different motion picture production, event. I was spending most of my time in Paris just trying to get the park built, and it was through some complications through the original management company, the park was really, really. It was really difficult to get it going. But then all that kind of failed, and Disney took over, and we brought in the right man from Imagineering point of view to oversee the project. And then it started hitting its stride and became, these parks are, everybody in the world thinks you can build these parks, and they're not. They're not easy. They're very difficult to do. So I was dedicated to doing that, to answer your question, and I was not involved in the film. Tom Fitzgerald is the one who would be in charge of theme park productions, and he was the one that instrumental in getting the ideas done. And I was involved in the idea stuff, but none of the production. And the reason I was involved in it was because it was in my land, and now I had to, think about this. You don't really know what the attraction is going to be, but you have to build the building and you have to design it. And how do you create how do you create a place that is more, that again tells a story on the outside? And in that particular case, I came up with this idea very similar to, we wanted some kind of a scientific lab, but this goes back to the feeling I have about creating animation and things coming alive for you. So we built those 5 spires, and they had crackling neon, and it was meant to look like, there was an energy source inside this building. There's nothing worse than a big dumb building. You need to animate them somehow. So that I had to get that stuff done. So in terms of the storytelling for the attraction on the inside, you have to know what they're doing on the inside so you can design the outside.
I don't remember. I can't count the hours, the number of hours I passed just in front of this building and inside the pre-show room of this ride.
We can't forget those pictures.
Let me stick with the attraction first. So the one thing I did do is there wasn't much design to be on. Well, I did. I actually designed the whole podium, and I designed the robot. You've probably seen the renderings I did. I originally did it as a robot Robin Williams. But I also decided, because of the complications, I didn't want any skin on it. So I made him the first human animatronic figure we've ever done. They just had clear plastic on him, and I put lights and fiber optics on the inside. So I designed all that stuff, and I did the pre-show. And so the funny thing is, I have to tell you, when we first opened it, a lot of people would go into that door, into the pre-show area, and either we did a poor job of communicating, or people just didn't think it was compelling enough. But people would sit through the pre-show, and then the doors to the theater would open up, and then people would just walk out the entrance. Oh, that wasn't very interesting. And then you're saying, no, that was just the pre-show. So, but you had to set it up. You always have a pre-show, and you want to set a pre-show up to have people really understand, accomplishments, and then I had my team trying to find all those artifacts and all those crackle neon lights in the roof, or in the ceiling, I should say. And so that really that kept us all busy, and believe me, in programming the robot and all the other stuff in there was just took years and years. As a matter of fact, I remember for that show, in relationship to the programming of it, I remember I was working, when you do the last year or so, or 6 or 8 months of any Disney park, you're basically working 7 days a week, every day. And so you're working 15 hours a day. So I remember one day, or one night, I should say, I decided I was going to go home at 7:30 in the evening, 8 o'clock, and I was going to come back at 2 in the morning. My wife and children were living, in Brisa-Marne, I think, someplace like that. Anyway, so I went and I went and ate and slept for a couple hours, and I came back to the park at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I walked in between Star Tours and the 3D Captain EO Theater, and it was just like mounds of dirt everywhere. We hadn't done the landscaping. I mean, we hadn't, they were just building the buildings, So I walked out there, and it's completely, it's just dark, there's no, barely, there's some lights on, and I see somebody walking out there, somebody walking on the, in the middle of Discoveryland, somebody by himself. And I keep walking closer and closer. I'm like, who the heck is that? And so I see it, and it's Michael Eisner.
Yeah. Okay. This goes always like that.
And Michael sees me. He goes, "Oh, thank God, Tim. God, you're here. Somebody, let's. I go, come on, Michael. Let's take a tour. So I go in, and because I was going back specifically because the crew, I think it was Tom Fitzgerald was there, Bob Zalk. There were several, producers there. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and they were in the pre-show area, and they were programming the lighting and the script and the audio and everything for that. And you walk in. Michael Eisner and I walk in, and as we walk in, there's some people sitting at computers. Some people are laying on couches, sleeping. This stuff goes. I have to say that it was really terrific. I walk in there and I go, "Hey guys," and they're like, "Hey Tim." I go, "Hey, look who I got." So I go. So Michael comes in. He knows everybody. He knew everybody, and I will make I can talk about Michael, and I can really talk about Frank Wells in the inspirational aspect of their leadership and their commitment to things and things to do and to do things correctly, right? And so here it is. It's, when I ran to Michael, I go, what's going on? He goes, I just flew in. I can't sleep, so I'm walking the park, and I don't know where I'm at. I need, can you walk around with me? And I'm saying, sure. So we walk the park. But going in, and when people are really dead tired and working, 12-hour, 18-hour days, and you're working 6 days a week and 7 days a week sometimes, and it's really neat when people who are in the upper management of the Walt Disney Company really care. They really care. They're there, and not giving just speeches, but really showing up. And
having a look on the project, on the works, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you really appreciate it. I will tell you, I can tell you about my meetings, because Space Mountain was delayed. I remember when you're developing a project, I have the creative team. I have a daily meeting at 8:30 in the morning every day. And it drives the team crazy sometimes. But the whole idea is not to have the meeting, but to have the meeting. Think of it more as like a huddle. Everybody, like you and your guys get around, like I'm the guy, hey, I will tell you, here's what's happening this week. Here are the things that have to be done. We have a meeting coming in. The board of directors is coming in. This is what we're doing. Anybody have any questions? Okay, great, go. And it's, you kind of run it that way. And I don't like having meetings because I like to tie people up. I don't like tying people up, but I do really like making sure that people stay on track, because creatively, if you have some groups you don't meet with them, projects have a tendency to drift off course, and I have to keep them really tight. I mean, I got Discoveryland on budget, on time, and finished by opening day. And that is a major thing to get done. It was a big deal. So when I was at Space Mountain, I would have the meetings in the model shop. And about 3 or 4 times in the course of, a year, I guess, Frank Wells would come in, and Frank would just, you're sitting, around the model. You got model tables all around. And Frank I'd see Frank coming in. We were in a different building. We were in a building dedicated to the Paris project. And Frank would just come in and he'd sit down at the table, sit out of the corner, on the edge there. Mm-hmm. And I just keep the meeting going, And he would just come in. He looked like he was really interested. And so eventually, there'd be a break, and I'd say, Frank, I'm not sure this is a meeting you're supposed to be in. And Frank goes, you're probably right, Tim. You're probably right. But you know what? I love sitting in these meetings. Where do you think I should be going? I'm like, well, go down the conference room here. They'll probably tell you where it is. Like, okay, that's great. You guys are doing a great job. That's, come on. This is great. It's fantastic. So it was great, because they were, they really care. They really care. Especially, Frank was really much more hands-on and, really quite extraordinary. It's a tragedy when we lost Frank and when he was killed in a helicopter accident. But, really, really sad. But anyway, so, okay. So I'm going to go back.
Let's continue on the Visionarium if you want, and maybe Benjamin has a question for you.
Yes, but it's very, very tough question. So you said that Robin Williams was your first choice to be timekeeper, and because he didn't speak French properly, we say. Someone else took the job, so it was Michel Leb in France. There was a kind of legend around Robin Williams, in particularly for the American version of the Timekeeper, that Robin Williams didn't record normally the speech for the movie, and there was a kind of issues with the Walt Disney Company, so you took blocks of rehearsals of Robin Williams and put together and cross the fingers to hope that it will be fit in the movie for the ride. Is that correct, or is it completely bullshit?
It is 100% correct.
Classic Robin Williams.
Told you so. Yeah.
It is.
You really, I'll tell you, with that bit of information you just said there, you really do have the inside. I mean, you got, I don't know, that must have come from Tom Fitzgerald or somebody, but that is exactly what happened. So and I will make one correction. You said Robin Williams was our first choice. Robin Williams was presented as a choice. We were just starting to think about it. And when somebody comes in and says, hey, this story that we want to create for Disneyland Paris, how would you feel about getting Robin Williams? And you're like, and everybody goes, sure. Can he speak French? How are we going to do it? Well, he says he can. It's fine. Well, what do I know? I mean, I don't know. So anyway, so what we decided to do was, and they said, well, Robin Williams, he's just finished, doing Aladdin, and he's the genie, and, it's great. He's available. He's around, and, let's see what we can do. And so apparently what happened, and again, I don't know if you know this part of the story, is that Robin Williams was willing to do Aladdin and do the genie and all that stuff. He just did not want, he just specifically told the Walt Disney Company, you can do this, and I don't mind it, I'll be involved, and I don't know what business arrangement they made. But what he said was, you cannot use my name to promote your Aladdin movie. I'll do the part and people will know it's me, but you can't say Robin Williams is in this movie.
Okay.
And I don't know why he had that feeling, or maybe he was doing it at a reduced rate. I really don't know. So, of course, he was happy with the Walt Disney Company, was fine. But again, like the Walt Disney Company did promote him, and he was really angry. Okay. So this happened after we had that, we had a meeting on Mother's Day, all day Sunday, which didn't make me very popular at home, but we did a read through. And so we were doing a read through, and his comments were funny and hysterical. And, he wasn't doing it in French, but he was just reading it to try to get the character. He was just trying to get, the character there. And we're trying to get him to establish it, what his character was going to be. So he did do that. And then the relationship fell apart, and then we found out that his French wasn't not good enough for this, and so it did kind of fall apart. But yeah, it was true that he was available. It was a great experience. I loved talking with him. He's a genius, or he was a genius, and it's so sad what happened to him. But if somebody goes, hey, do you want to have, if you say, I'm thinking about a movie, and somebody goes, oh, would you like to have Brad Pitt in it? You're like, yeah, of course we would. We'll make it, that's how the world functions. You want to get the best talent or the most notable talent, but it just didn't work out on many fronts. So they eventually made up with him, and I think Katzenberg gave him $1 million Picasso painting or something. I don't know what it was, but they kissed and made up. And so, but it's all just history now.
And do you remember maybe some improv he made that made you laugh, but you didn't keep in the final material?
Most of his ad libs were not necessarily related to the material. You can take any, like his Aladdin performance, they probably had a structure for a comment, but for his theme of what he was going to say, and obviously the song, but I think he ad libs everything, So to answer your question specifically, I don't really have a specific thing. It's just and I dealt with him on other projects, and he has just a role of consciousness, of streaming, of just his mind was like light speed. He could just throw any comment out, and he was just like, and it was. I remember having one conversation with him not on this project, but on another project. We were walking across the campus at Imagineering, and he's just kind of riffing on everything. And he had just gotten back from being on vacation, and I walked away from that thinking, it was a little, well, I don't want to say anything negative, but it was kind of scary how fast his brain would go in comments, and this, he was just like commenting. Yeah. You can't catch up. You can't catch up. So, again, an incredible talent, a brilliant guy.
Did you know at the time that the Visionarium would eventually be duplicated in the other Disney parks?
No, not at all. I did not know that at all. I was wondering if we were going to make it for Paris. Okay. Believe me, you really don't know how these things are going to really work out. We were just trying to, I was so singularly focused. We just had so much work to do to get this park built, and it was so complex. As I said earlier, we had more more E-type attractions on opening day than we've ever had in any other park. Now, remember, the other issue was I was also working on the Discovery Mountain project, which was, the big 100-meter diameter one. And I was trying to make sure that we had a place for that. And because that was not going to make opening day, I had to make Discoveryland look like it was always finished. It didn't want to look like it had a big hole in the middle of the land, which it did, and you didn't know it.
It was a hell.
So, there was a lot of things going on that you just had to take care of. And again, that's why I wasn't involved in the production. Tom Fitzgerald and his group did a fantastic job in terms of developing that attraction. You just can't take on all that. I was there at the beginning, as I said, so I could know how the land would react and what the building would look like and how we would develop a pre-show. But in terms of all that stuff, we're just trying to get there for opening day. The idea I think the idea of it being placed in other parks had a lot to do with how it was received in Paris. If it was a bomb, and we knew it was going to be a tough audience because the French are critical of things and understandable.
We're the worst. We know it.
Well, yeah, but you did it. You did it in such a clever way because actually you were mentioning the storyline of the ride itself in the past during the last minutes, but actually what's something that struck me when I saw the movie and the experience when I lived it the first time is that you chose with your team to put the action after Jules Verne wrote all of his stories. So instead of going the easy way and lazy way to say that basically Jules Verne was kidnapped and shown, and then he wrote it, you preferred to take the other way around and to show him after the fact, because From the Earth to the Moon was published in 1865, something like that, and most of these stories were from the 80s, the 18th, and so that when placing the action at the Universal Exposition of Paris in 1900, you were just basically showing Jules Verne, bringing him in the future to show him that he was truth, he was correct. And that's something that is just really, really clever because you are not rewriting the history. You're just showing this man that he was right all this time. And that's really clever.
Well, I think it's respectful of his talent, and I think we wanted to be as respectful to the French culture as possible. I will say that one of the inspirations that I used for that particular, or actually for more Space Mountain, is that and I can't remember what it was, in 1960s or 70s or something like that. Look magazine put an article out that it talked about Jules Verne's From the Earth to the Moon. Right. And it really, what it did, it had some of the original etching drawings that they used for the publication of the book. Yeah. And then right next to it, they had these images of the Apollo mission. And when you see the parallels in the story, the fact that, when Jules Verne wrote that story, he wrote it about, well, the only people who could get us to the moon are going to be the Americans, which I didn't understand why he did that, but he did. And then he said they would launch from a place called Tampa Town, which is basically Orlando, which is 90 miles away from where the American Apollo missions were launched. Yeah. And it shows space capsule and the Jules Verne's drawings or the etchings from the book, and then shows the Apollo mission, and then it shows that the bullet landing back into the ocean, and then the Apollo mission landing in the ocean, and both of them had American flags on it. Jules Verne was a genius. How, the parallels were just amazing. So I think that from our side, from the American side, it was a huge, huge respectful kind of thing. And we wanted to handle it as respectful as possible. And I think it came across in the attraction.
Yeah.
When I was given a land, or when you're given a project, you're also handed a lot of other information. The information happens to be the number of attractions you have. They don't care what it is, but the parks themselves really focus on capacities. All right. And Disney, more than any other theme park company in the world, has to focus on capacities, and you have to hit your mark. So when you, along with capacities, you also are given a program. And the program in that particular case is we had to have the largest food facility in the Disneyland Paris park. So, it's like any kind of architectural plan. You're handed a program and you have to have so many square feet dedicated to, dining and retail and attractions and all that. And you have to adhere to all that. And on top of that, it all comes with a budget and you have to stay within budget. So by far, and this was, I don't know, 50,000 square feet or 5,000 square meters or something. It was a very large facility. So keeping in context to the overall, in a way, Jules Verne theme, whatever, but also the idea that trying to actually adhere to Disney properties, I immediately thought of, this whole thing of Discoveryland and like Tomorrowland's or Land on the Move. So everything's going on. So we didn't have that many opportunities, but I decided, well, why don't we just make a big, airship hangar and use the Hyperion airship from Island at the Top of the World, which was a kind of a B, C plus movie from Disney, but it was very iconic in terms of their, of the airship that was involved. And it was kind of meant to go along with the overall theme of the overall park. The overall Disneyland Paris park was really meant to focus on not only the attractions, but also icon images. Mm-hmm. So that's why in this park, and again, this was part of the experience team that worked on it, is it because we were going to a culture that was, multiple cultures and different languages, you really wanted to focus on things. So that's why there are Skull Rock and pirate boats and the Orbitron and, Big Thunder Mountain in the middle. And those are translatable. They just you don't have to explain what they are. You just know what they are. So I used the airship for the Hyperion, and to walk underneath this big giant airship, I thought, well, it'd be a great marquee. Plus, and I strategically located it so when you're coming down Main Street, if you look into Discoveryland, you can see it. You just see off to the right as you're coming down towards, you pass Coke Corner. There it is right there. So these are meant to be, the classic, I'm sure you've heard about this, that Walt referred to them and we all refer to them as weenies. Mm-hmm. There's a weenie. Yeah. Go to that weenie, head to that. And actually an interesting metaphor for me personally was the way the city of Paris is laid out is that you have long avenues with an icon in the middle and you basically do what we call connect the dots, right? So you go from one place, you look to the Champs-Élysées and then you look farther down and you see, you see other icons all around the place. So the theme parks in a way connect the dots that same way. So I wanted to create this airship. So airship, hey, aircraft hangar, let's make this thing a big aircraft hangar. And it was such a big space that I knew, what, if we just go to expose steel, metal, we can fabricate this thing. And we did. That's exactly what it was. Most of the steel was fabricated in a factory. And we built all the foundations and the basements. And then it was it was erected up in, a month. And it was just it was like building, Legos. It was just like building this whole thing. So it worked really well. It worked as a food facility, and it had a big stage, and had backstage areas and supporting areas
and restrooms.
Right. It worked. And again, if you look at all of the buildings, like I said, on the spires for Visionarium, there's all this neon that's crackling all over the place. And then I put those big fans on the exterior that rotated. Yeah. I like buildings that are animated. I don't like things that are just stationary. And the fans, none of it makes any sense, but you're in a theme park and that's what you can do. So you get as much animation going on as possible. And so yeah, we created this was an airship hangar or a terminal, and so I did those maps over the dining, over the food service counter areas
of the countries. I guess the Zeppelin has visited and all.
Yeah, I mean, and right, and we had those maps, and we had the big elaborate, clock going on. So it looked like this was a point of departure, but now it's been converted into a food facility and stage for Disney. So, I don't know. It was just one of those logical. I mean, it's, what you do is you end up creating your own logic. Imagine you say like, well, you need a food facility in this land. In all of our traditional parks, in the Tomorrowland Terrace,
Yep.
which is usually, there, if you go to Florida or Disneyland or whatever,
Yep.
in Tokyo, in all the parks, they're all the major. They are the big food. They are the big food facilities. So that's what we just created, and like you don't know how it's going to work out, so you just start. And the way you start, and again, going back to this visual literacy that we all kind of go through. You just start doing drawings, and you do hundreds of drawings, and then you come across one, you go, that's it. It just tells you that's it. It jumps right out at you. So this is it. So that's what you do, and then you start getting like 300 people to work on it. You start drawing it.
And just you talked a little earlier about the parallel you did between the implementation of the Winnies inside, let's say, Discoveryland here, and you took the example of the city of Paris. But what about the inspirations, the design inspirations for the look itself of Discoveryland, or at least for the front part of Discoveryland, because we clearly see some kind of difference between the back of Discoveryland, where Star Tours and Cinemagic Theatre were, exactly, Captain EO, and the front with Videopolis, Arbitron, then Autopia, and the Visionarium in 1992. So tell us a little about the inspiration that you saw as inspiration for this kind of design, because it was unique in a theme park.
When I was designing the park, the one thing that I always had in mind, and I could always see whenever I was standing up there, is I was always imagining Space Mountain sitting there, and Space Mountain, Discovery Mountain, however you want to define it. And it was always there. I mean, I could always see it there. If you look at that, I did an original overall rendering probably in 1986 or something like that, and it's outside the land and it's looking into the land, and there was always a big Space Mountain there. So I always, even when we were working on it, there was a big, just air there, just sky. I always saw the Space Mountain there. So I thought that the first area, the front area, where Orbitron is dead center and everything kind of revolves around it, the guests flow around it, but everything's always kind of moving around it. I thought there was a particular vocabulary, an architectural vocabulary that had to take place there. Now, the most important thing you have to remember that I want to make here is, regardless of what the architectural styles were, and as I said, I tried to relate the architectural style with a particular show on the inside, right?
Yeah.
But even those are individuals, they somehow had to be connected together. Okay, it wasn't just like, some 1920s observatory building next to a Victorian aircraft hangar next to a, whatever. I wasn't as concerned about Star Tours and Captain EO and the backside of the land, because they were always going to be behind Space Mountain, and they were actually even behind the berm. So, I'd rather, I'm even though I have to design the buildings, I really don't want to make a big deal out of those buildings. I'd rather make a bigger deal out of the icons. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you look at everything individually, there was a kind of uniqueness to them all. Especially what I wanted to do, and I ended up doing it, is that the actual entrance into Discoveryland from the hub is not a straight line. I like what we call a sense of discovery. How appropriate, Discoveryland.
Yeah.
Instead of just walking straight in. I mean, I kind of think, like, if you see the castle, even Tom did it on the castle, the walkway curves going in and you elevate into the castle. But something like Fort Comstock, or however they called it in Paris for Frontierland, it kind of goes straight in, but you kind of acknowledge that. And certainly there was a bit of a curvature going into Adventureland. So Discoveryland, I wanted to make this curve. So what you do is, in a way, each land is like switching channels on a TV. You want to make sure that each one has its own integrity, has its own, style and its own look. So you don't want to just walk in, this is something I really kind of tattooed in my own brain when I did have you guys been to the Living Seas Pavilion?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's the whole point of the hydrolator. Hydrolator is really meant to take you, if you saw I don't even know what they do now, but you don't want to just like, oh, we're under the ocean. No, you have to have something that breaks the outside world to the inside world. And so the hydrolator ended up proving, to be like, hey, what could be better than a fake elevator? So Discoveryland actually did the same thing. It curved in as it goes into the land. And then I had that other side entrance over by the restaurant.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of a sneak in. I always liked things, I think Tom Sawyer's Island had some secret things to get in and out of Fort Comstock. And, I remember those things as a kid. So it's like you want to kind of sneak in. And then what happens is it's kind of the classic Frank Lloyd Wright architectural model where you compress the entrance and then it opens up to the inside. Or it's like any cathedral. You go into the vestibule and you come into a small lower space and then you go from the outside world into this vestibule.
Yeah.
And then it opens up to the cathedral.
And the whole place reveals itself fully. So it makes like a big, whoa, what is that?
Right. It's the gee whiz moment. It's the point of, if you've ever been to Yosemite here and you go to Inspiration Point, you go through this tunnel and then the tunnel opens up and it's Yosemite, the greatest national park in the world. It's the same thing. We all react to spaces emotionally. Okay, that's really the key. So individually, these things were kind of had their own identity, but collectively they also had to be tied together. Now, earlier you asked me a question about I was going to spin off, but now is the right time to bring this back.
Yeah.
So there was one thing that was another layer of development for Discoveryland, and that happens to be, I don't want to make this some old fuddy old, museum piece. It wasn't going to be like that. So the way you actually fix all these kinds of things, and we use colors and materials and painted colors and things like that, painted them correctly, or appropriately for what their particular era happened to be. Like, for example, the Orbitron being this classic old beautiful planetary model, which was kind of in coppers and bronzes and brasses and all that stuff. But I didn't really want it to look like some old thing. So the key to all this stuff was, how do you link them together and how do you kind of kick out the oldness and kind of make it what I consider to be, this is my word for Discoveryland. So I want to make it timeless. How do we make it timeless? I don't want it to be old. It's not going to be brand new, but how do we make it no time? So if you look at the Orbitron, you see everything is edged in neon. So you're putting this copper and bronze thing, and you edge everything with this neon that looks kind of like laser light. Or you have Visionarium with those crackle neon spires going up, and so it took it out of being an 18th, 19th century building to something that is like, what is this? And I did the same thing for the spires at Star Tours. Captain EL, I don't know what we did for that. It didn't really matter. But the neon actually I remember the first time we turned on the neon for the Star Tours building, and I was standing at the hub, and I was like, oh my God, it overwhelmed everything, but eventually it got hidden. But we put neon on almost all the buildings, and it was just like a really fine, like laser light that went around it. And that was the whole idea of how to make these things so timeless. As I said, timeless was really the key, Now, the big challenge is, the other thing I will tell you also, that in each land, is in looking back at the park overall, there are certain commonality things. You're always going to have landscaping, and for Disney parks, you always put rock work. So what you really want to do is create your own vocabulary for rock work and your own vocabulary for landscaping and planting. So it's easy for, Fantasyland had more of the kind of the Ivan Earl cube building, or cube cut trees in front. And And obviously Adventureland has its own exotic plants and it goes along with that, and same with Frontierland. But we had to create a new kind of landscaping scheme for Discoveryland. So, whether it was rock work, and I started doing rock work designs, and the rock work design was really meant to be the whole idea around what was going to be Discovery Mountain was this whole mechanical mountain sitting on top of a volcano, and again, a little bit like Mysterious Island from Jules Verne. Right?
Yeah, and it's in continuity with all the rocks we found in the lands that are around the rides, like they were coming from the ground.
That's correct. So you had all this energy in front. Now, I had all those, I had special effects, and it ended up being a disaster. I mean, Michael Eisner gave me, for years afterwards, he would always introduce me to creating, the entrance to Discoveryland has lighting effects, and they never worked. Okay, so Thanks, Michael. I remember one time I was presenting something, to him, and he stopped everybody and said, "Well, let's talk about how's that entrance to Discoveryland coming? How's that rock work coming?" And I stopped the meeting. I said, "Stop. Just stop." I said, "How long are you going to bug me about the entrance to Discoveryland?" And he goes, and he looks at me and he goes, "Forever." Oh, okay. I'm looking at Marty Sklar, and he's probably, gasping for air that I would stop a meeting like that and just to kind of respond. But I pushed back. But I had a great relationship with Eisner and those guys, because it was good. I appreciate everything they did. So it was like, so the entrance was, it was running late. We didn't, special effects was way behind schedule. And so, but I wanted the energy of bubbling water and fire in the water. And
there was fire at the entrance of Discoveryland?
The fire was not on the rocks, okay? The fire was on the surface of the water. And what happened is that they had gas lines run on the floor of the pond there, right? So they would just release gas. The natural gas would come up to the surface, and then there were igniters there, and it would just light. The fire was on the water, right? And either somebody, here's the other problem, is that when they don't maintain special effects, they can go really bad, for you. And it just didn't last. They couldn't maintain it, so they just took all out of it. Yeah. But it created energy and the bubbling. One of the cheapest effects and the most effective effect you can actually ever do is putting air in water, and it bubbles up. Okay, it's very simple, and if you've ever seen the Nautilus submarine sitting out there without the bubblers, the difference between no bubbles coming next to the submarine and bubbles, one of them makes the submarine look like it's alive. And if it's without it, it looks like a big cement dumb sculpture in the middle of the water. It makes no sense at all. Okay, so it's a cheap effect, and so that's why they should continue always to do that kind of thing. And unfortunately, when projects get into trouble, they start cutting things like that, which is really super simple, cheap effects. But I will tell you another kind of deep secret about when you develop attractions for Disney. There's nothing more disappointing than for you to spend a year of your life working on things where you have to go and fight for them, and you have to go in front of these, management teams where you like, I've got this budget for this, I'm going to take that money, I'm going to put in something else, and you fight for something, and you fight for those water effects and lighting effects that are, with all things considered in terms of the attractions, they're relatively simple to fix and simple to maintain, but the management on the parks, and it's understandable. I get it. I get every aspect of the business. What they realize is that people come and they plunk their money down to go to the parks because they realize that what people really want to do is they actually want to go and ride the rides. So all the other stuff, whether it's lighting effects or special effects in the landscaping and things like that, that takes a secondary or third priority. The fan belts got broken, and so they didn't fix it. And so it's just a big pool of water. You want to know about theme park design? If you ever have a big area of water and the water is just flat and dead, then the whole land is dead. If you activate it with waves or water or
Bubbles,
or air bubblers and things like that, if the water's alive, then the land's alive. You know, if you have boats going through, it's even better. It's great. It's active. It's going on. But you know, you can't have big bodies of water with nothing in it because it's dead.
And just like that, we've already reached the end of our second episode with Tim. But don't worry, thought, we will keep exploring the incredible world of Discoveryland, which is packed with fascinating stories and behind-the-scene anecdotes. We haven't revealed everything yet, so we hope to see you all back for episode 3. In the meantime, we really hope you enjoyed this series. If you are, feel free to leave us a comment below this episode on the streaming platform or YouTube. Hit the like button and share it as much possible, because thanks to you, we can spread the incredible story of Discoveryland to even more people. See you in 2 weeks. Take care. Bye bye.